Tonight, I took my husband to the airport. I thought it was just another business trip, nothing more. But when we were about to return home, my son, only 7 years old, clamped my hand with his small, cold fingers and whispered to me in a voice I had never heard from him before. "Mom, don't go back home. This morning I heard Dad planning something about us. Please, believe me this time." I believed him, and I hid to watch my own house with my heart pounding in my chest. And regarding what I saw next, before the story truly begins, imagine you are on a YouTube story channel. The narrator tells you calmly, write in the comments from which city and country you are watching this story. Don't forget to like and subscribe so we can bring you more and more intense and emotional stories. Then the voice softens and begins the history of Elena, a woman who lost everything in just a few hours, or at least that's what she thought at first. The bright lights in the departures terminal of the capital's international airport tired Elena. The cold air from the air conditioning contrasted with the warmth of her husband, Colleen's embrace. Beside her stood Darius, their 7-year-old son, silent, with his hand glued to his dinosaur backpack. Elena returned Colleen's hug, inhaling the familiar scent of his cologne. As usual, he looked impeccable. A perfectly ironed blue shirt, styled hair, a reassuring smile. Anyone who saw them would see the image of a successful husband and father, a respected and confident man. "This trip is very important, darling," said Colleen with his calm and persuasive voice. He untangled his arms from Elena and crouched down in front of Darius. "Darius, take care of Mom while I'm gone, okay? I'll only be away for a few days." He ran his palm over the boy's hair. Darius didn't smile. He just nodded a single time, looking at his father with a strangely fixed attention. Elena attributed this reaction to his nature of being a quiet child who observed more than he spoke. Colleen didn't seem bothered by the lack of enthusiasm. He laughed briefly, kissed Darius's forehead, then stood up. "My plane is boarding immediately." "I'm leaving now," he said, kissing Elena's forehead and looking at her gently. "I'll call you as soon as I land. Be safe on the road. Get home and get some rest. I love you both." Elena nodded. "Take care of yourself. Call us when you arrive," she said. Colleen's smile, that smile that had melted her heart so many times, appeared once more on his face. Then he turned, pulled his trolley bag behind him, and walked confidently toward the security gate. Elena and Darius remained standing among dozens of rushing people, watching Colleen's back as it moved away until he disappeared behind the glass doors. His departure left behind a void that was hard to describe. The flight announcements and the clatter of heels on marble became clear again, as if someone had suddenly unmuted the background music. Elena took a deep breath. Every time Colleen left, she felt the same loneliness, even though she knew his job required such trips. "Come on, sweetie, let's go home," she said, taking Darius by the hand. His palm was cold as ice. The boy followed her without saying a word. They walked in silence down the long corridor toward the parking lot. Their footsteps echoed rhythmically. Elena tried to break the silence. "When we get home, do you want me to make you warm milk with cocoa?" Darius murmured something unintelligible, somewhere between yes and no. Elena thought he was probably tired. It was already late, and the airport had exhausted him. The underground parking lot was dimly lit and slightly stifling. Up on the floor where she had left her car, only a few scattered vehicles could be seen. Elena pressed the button on the remote. The car's lights flashed briefly. She headed toward the driver's door, and Darius went toward the back seat. Just as her hand touched the handle, she felt a violent jerk on her wrist. She turned around, frightened. Darius stood stiffly, gripping her wrist with all the strength he was capable of. His small fingernails pressed into her skin. His face was white, shining strangely under the pale neon light. "Darius, what is it?" "Did you see something?" she asked, dropping to her knees so she could look into his eyes. Her heart was beating faster and faster. The boy shook his head, swallowing hard, and brought his lips close to her ear. He spoke almost voicelessly. "Mom, we are not going back home." Elena furrowed her brows. What do you mean, not go home? It's late, sweetie. Where would we go? Darius shook his head more energetically, gripping her hand even tighter. No, Mom, please, not home. This morning I heard Dad on the phone in his office. He was planning something about us. The word planning pricked her. What exactly did you hear? She asked, feeling an anxiety wash over her that she tried to dismiss. Darius took a deep breath, as if gathering all his little courage. He said that after we fall asleep, everything needs to be resolved. His voice wasn't like usual, Mom. It was cold, and it scared me. Please, believe me this time. Tears moistened the corners of his eyes. Believe me this time. Those words fell upon Elena like a hammer. She remembered how, a few weeks ago, Darius had told her that a strange man was sitting in a car in front of the house, watching them from a distance. Back then, she had smiled and told him it was just his imagination. She remembered how he had told her that he didn't like that uncle, Colin's new business partner, and how he had begged him not to come visit them anymore. She had asked Darius to be polite. A painful crack opened between reason and instinct. Colin was her husband of 9 years, the father of her child, the man who had just hugged her at the airport and told her, "I love you." Yet Darius's look was not a fantasy. It wasn't the whim of a tired child. It was pure terror in the eyes of a little boy who didn't usually exaggerate. Darius didn't invent stories to get attention. He was a quiet, lucid child. If there was even a small chance he was right, Elena knew she could never live with the idea that she had ignored him. She felt her mouth go dry. She wiped the tears from his cheeks with trembling fingers and nodded slowly. "Okay, sweetie," she said in a low voice. "I believe you. We aren't going home tonight." She didn't know what plan Colin had. She didn't know if Darius had understood the conversation correctly, but she knew one thing. Tonight, the two of them would not enter their house. She opened the door, helped Darius climb into the back seat, buckled his seatbelt, then sat at the steering wheel. Her hands were shaking when she turned the key in the ignition. Instead of exiting the parking lot toward the highway that led straight home, Elena turned the car in the other direction, looking for a side exit. She drove slowly, her eyes constantly in the mirrors, like a fugitive who doesn't know who she is running from. They exited onto the boulevard, then took a long detour until they reached a dead-end street, a few hundred meters from their luxury residential complex, Green Valley, in the north of the capital. It was a dark alley hidden behind a row of closed shops, but from there, the entrance gate to the neighborhood was clearly visible. She stopped the engine. "We're going to wait here a little," she said softly. The silence in the car was oppressive. Only the sound of crickets in the bushes opposite and their breathing could be heard. Elena turned off the interior lights, leaving them immersed in darkness. Darius sat straight on the back seat, his eyes fixed on the neighborhood gate, located approximately 100 meters away. Elena kept glancing at the digital clock on the dashboard. 8:40, 8:50. Every minute seemed like an hour. Doubt had started to gnaw at her. What am I doing? Sitting like a crazy woman in a car, on a dark street, with a scared child next to me, just for a whisper he might have misunderstood? Colin was probably on the plane. Maybe he was sleeping, convinced that his wife and son were sleeping peacefully at home. Maybe Darius had a nightmare. Maybe she was being unfair. The cold penetrated her jacket, not just from the outside air, but from the faceless fear that had settled in her bones. "Maybe I'm wrong," whispered Elena with a hoarse voice. "Maybe we should go home." "It's warmer there." Darius didn't take his eyes off the gate. "We wait more, Mom," he said briefly but determinedly. There was a certainty in his voice that made her fall silent again. Elena bit her lip and decided to let another quarter of an hour pass. At 10 o'clock sharp, approximately when she calculated Colin's plane should have landed in the destination city, the headlights of a dark van appeared from the bend of the street. Her heart stopped for a moment. She instinctively crouched down and pulled Darius down too, even though they were far enough away. "Don't move," she whispered, looking through a narrow strip between the dashboard and the window. The van approached the complex gate and entered without hesitation. It wasn't the car of a hurried visitor or a courier. It moved slowly, like a predator measuring its territory. The car advanced down the main alley, then turned onto the street where their family lived. Elena held her breath. The van slowed down and eventually stopped exactly in front of their house at number 17. An iceberg settled in her stomach. Maybe they are from some repair company, she told herself. But who comes for repairs at 10 o'clock at night with a van bearing no logo and tinted windows? The front doors opened. 2 men got out, dressed in dark clothes, with caps hiding their features under the dim light of the street lamps. They had no visible weapons, and that was exactly what made them more frightening. The 2 stopped for a moment in front of the gate, looking left and right. The neighborhood was completely quiet. Most neighbors were already asleep. Elena expected them to try to jump the fence or force the gate like in a common robbery. Then she could have called the police and reported a break-in. But what she saw froze the blood in her veins. One of the men put his hand in his pocket and took out a set of keys. She watched him insert the key into the lock. A short click was heard, sinisterly clear in the silence of the night. The gate opened smoothly, without any noise. "It can't be," hissed Elena, instinctively putting her hand over her mouth to stop herself from screaming. "He had a key?" The man stepped into the yard, followed by the other. They headed toward the front door, and the first one took out a second key. He opened the door with the same ease Elena did every day. The door opened, and the 2 disappeared inside, closing it behind them like owners returning home. Elena's body began to shake violently. This was no longer a simple attempted theft. Burglars don't come with duplicate keys. The keys to the gate and the door were held by only 2 people, her and Colin. Her husband, who was supposed to be hundreds of kilometers away. "Mom, they went in," whispered Darius with a trembling voice. "Dad gave them the keys, didn't he?" Elena couldn't find words to answer. Her throat tightened. She looked at their house, where they had invested years of work, love, memories, now occupied by 2 strangers, moving inside as if they were at home. They hadn't turned on the main light. Through the living room curtains, only narrow beams of flashlights could be seen. They moved calmly, methodically, as if they knew exactly what they were looking for. 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Elena was paralyzed. She could have called the police, but what would she have said? "Some men entered my house with keys. My husband probably gave them." She would have sounded like a paranoid woman, disturbed by jealousy or trauma. The police would have come, rang the doorbell, and the men would have had enough time to flee. While anxiety was suffocating her, a barely perceptible smell sneaked into the car through the ventilation grill. A chemical smell, sharp like gasoline. Elena looked at Darius in horror. He had smelled it too. His eyes widened. "Mom, what smells like that?" She didn't get to answer. Her gaze stuck to the window of Darius's bedroom upstairs. A strange, trembling light of a dirty orange suddenly lit up behind the glass. In a few seconds, the same light lit up in the living room, too. The white curtains began to take on a sinister glow. Flames were spreading like tongues of fire on the fabric. "Our house is burning," whispered Darius with a swallowed scream. Elena felt everything inside her collapse. It wasn't a robbery. It wasn't simple intimidation. It was a murder plot. Colleen didn't just want to get rid of them from the house. He wanted them to die in it, in their sleep, enveloped by fire. The business trip, the hug, the kiss at the airport, they had all been just alibis. The perfect alibi. Just then, the phone in her pocket vibrated. With trembling hands, Elena took it out. A message from Colleen. Her heart tightened when she opened the short message. "Just landed. I hope you are already sleeping peacefully." "I love you both," she wanted to scream. She rushed out of the car, put a hand to her mouth, and vomited on the cold asphalt. The sour and bitter taste filled her mouth. She leaned against the door, suffocated by nausea and shock. In front of her, the house where she had raised Darius was now a torch. Black smoke rose thickly, reeking of gasoline and burning objects. The window of Darius's room upstairs shattered with a dry noise, throwing out tongues of fire that licked the facade. It was a picture of hell. "Mom, Mom!" Darius's shout from inside the car brought her back to reality. The boy had pressed his face against the window, his cheeks streaming with tears, watching everything burn. His room, his toys, his life. Elena wiped her mouth with her sleeve, swallowed her crying, and forced herself to move. She had to be strong. She had to save him. She returned to the steering wheel with trembling hands. She still felt her soul tearing apart watching the flames. Darius's photos from when he was a baby were there, her favorite wedding dress, the veil received from her mother, all the little pieces of life gathered for years. Everything was turning to ash. Firefighter sirens were heard in the distance, getting closer and closer. Someone, perhaps a neighbor, had raised the alarm. Panicked, Elena looked toward the house. The main door opened. The two men in dark clothes came out running, not seeming terrified, just in a hurry. They got into the van and the vehicle took off, peeling out without headlights, disappearing into the night a few moments before the first fire truck appeared at the complex entrance. They had escaped. Elena knew she couldn't go there. She couldn't run to the firefighters, screaming that her husband had tried to kill her. Who would have believed her? Colin was a respected businessman, a member of the community council, generous with donations at neighborhood events. The world saw him as a model. Elena, on the other hand, would have seemed like a hysterical woman, traumatized by the fire, projecting guilt and fear onto her husband. And the only witness to the truth was a 7-year-old child who had just seen his house burning. His story about the whispers at the airport would have been categorized as the imagination of a traumatized child. Colin had constructed everything perfectly. He had alibis, reputation, control. The phone vibrated again, but it was just the screen lighting up with the same message. "I hope you are already sleeping peacefully." Those words cut her like a knife of ice. She had to leave. She couldn't run to friends. Almost all of them were Colin's friends. She couldn't go to relatives. Her parents had died, and more distant relatives didn't have the resources to protect her. Colin would have played the role of the desperate husband, searching for his missing wife and child after the fire. He would have displayed their photos on television and social networks, turning the entire country into his eyes and ears. Elena and Darius would have become hunted by the man who was supposed to protect them. In the chaos of her thoughts, a memory took shape clearly. She was in her father's office years ago, shortly before he died. Petre Popescu, an old and prudent lawyer, sat at his desk full of papers and showed her a stack of files. Elena had told him back then, "Life is complicated. If you ever have a problem so big that you can't talk to anyone, not even your husband, find this woman." He had written a name and a number on a piece of thick cardboard, Lawyer Rodeka Stoyan. Elena remembered even now the piece of cardboard kept for years in her home office, a drawer that was now probably just ash, but the name had remained in her mind, Rodeka Stoyan. She vaguely remembered the address, too, a small law firm in an old building in the old city center. It was her only hope. She turned the steering wheel and drove away from the dead-end street, taking a detour route, opposite to the road toward the house and toward the sirens that kept coming. Looking in the mirror, she saw Darius huddled, with the seatbelt surrounding his small body. He was no longer crying. He was looking straight ahead, pale but determined. He had saved their lives. Elena drove through the night with her heart pounding. She had nothing left. Her wallet, ID, cash, all were in the bag left in the living room. She only had her phone, the car, the clothes on her back, and Darius. At every car that appeared behind them, especially if it was a dark van, she felt her stomach tighten. After almost an hour, the car stopped in front of an old office building in a deserted area of the old center. The clock on the dashboard showed almost 1 o'clock in the morning. Most of the street lamps were out. The The plaster on the building was peeling, and above a door, a weathered sign could be seen. Stoyan Law Firm. It looked like a place abandoned for good years. Doubt hit her again. Did I understand the address correctly? Is this woman even still alive? She stopped the engine. The darkness and silence fell upon their shoulders. Darius had finally fallen asleep, with his head resting to one side, exhausted. Elena took out her phone. The battery showed 15%. She searched for the lawyer's name on the internet and found the number for the office. It rang 3 times, only a busy tone. Naturally, at that hour, no one answered. She rested her forehead on the steering wheel, on the verge of bursting into tears. What should she do? Sleep in the car? Suddenly, the phone vibrated. An unknown number was calling her. She hesitated for a second, fearing it was Colleen, but she had no choice. Hello? The voice of an elderly woman, hoarse but firm, was heard on the other end. You called my office 3 times at this hour. I assume it's not a question about taxes. Elena felt her heart squeeze. I am Elena, Petre Popescu's daughter. She stammered. I am in front of your office. I need help. Don't talk on the phone, the woman interrupted her. 50 meters in front of you is a narrow alley next to a grocery store. Enter that alley. On the left is a green wooden door. Knock 3 times quickly. The call ended. Without thinking twice, Elena started the engine and advanced slowly to the entrance of the narrow alley. The weathered green door was there. She parked the car in a secluded spot, then gently woke Darius. Sweetie, we've arrived. We have to get out. Darius blinked confusedly. Elena picked him up in her arms and, with the boy glued to her, approached the green door. She knocked 3 times slowly, as she had been told. The door opened almost soundlessly. In the doorway stood an elderly woman, nearing her late 60s, with white hair tied in a simple bun. She wore nothing ostentatious, a long-sleeved blouse and a sober long skirt. Her eyes, however, were incredibly clear and sharp. She looked Elena up and down, then Darius, without any smile, just with a sort of cold evaluation. It was Rodica Stoyan. Come in, she said briefly. Elena stepped into a studio apartment hidden behind the office, a small but tidy apartment filled with books and files. The air smelled of old paper and jasmine tea. Rodica closed the door and drew 3 systems of bars and safety chains, one after another. Sit down, I'll make you tea, she said. More of a command than an invitation. Elena sat on a hard sofa. Darius clung to her. The lawyer returned with a tray on which were 3 steaming cups and a plate of biscuits. Drink, then tell me everything from the beginning, without omitting anything, Rodica said, placing the cups in front of them. And Elena recounted. She spoke about Colin's trip, about Darius's whisper in the parking lot, about the decision not to go home, about the dark van, about the keys that opened the gate and the door, about the smell of gasoline and the flames swallowing their house, about the cold message sent exactly when the house was burning. In places, her voice cracked, but she continued, pushed by the need to get everything out. Darius, calmer now, completed important details. How he had heard Colin's conversation on the phone in the morning, how his father had said, after they fall asleep, how his voice didn't sound like usual, but like a stranger's.
Rodica didn't interrupt her, just listened with a motionless face, nodding from time to time, as if checking off some suspicions she already had. When the story ended, the silence that settled seemed heavier than the words. Finally, the lawyer put her cup on the table. I feared this day would come, she said slowly. Since your father died, Elena, I have been watching your husband from a distance. I didn't trust him, and now my suspicions have been confirmed. I don't understand what Dad has to do with all this, Elena asked, feeling her chest tighten again. Everything, answered Rodica. Colleen has been hunting your father's inheritance for years. Elena shook her head. What inheritance? Dad left nothing but this house.
The house that is now ash and some money for Darius's studies. I was still paying off the car in installments. Colleen always told me that business was going well. Rodica smiled bitterly. That is what Colleen knew. That is what your father wanted the world to believe. The truth is different. Your father was a very rich man, but he hated laziness and greed. He saw both defects in Colleen from the very beginning, so he put everything in safekeeping. She stood up, went to a metal cabinet, took out a thick folder, and placed it on the table. Your father made 2 wills. The first, the one Colleen knows, is the bait. The second, the real one, is here, legally registered, stored by me. All his serious assets, real estate in several cities, deposits in lei, gold, collections, were placed into a trust fund with very strict clauses. The fund could be released only in 2 situations. First, when you turn 40 years old. Second, when you, as the primary heir, and Darius, as the secondary heir, both die. Elena felt her breath blocking. She was 32 years old, 8 years until the first option. Colleen somehow found out about the existence of the real will, Rodica continued. His businesses are dust. He has huge debts to illegal casinos abroad and dubious investments. He is being chased by loan sharks who don't joke around. He is desperate. He cannot wait 8 years. In his mind, there is only one fast way to get his hands on the money. Your death and Darius's. Everything connected in a terribly logical way. The business trip, the message sent exactly at the right moment. The accidental fire that was to be explained by a short circuit or a gas leak. Him far away with clear proof that he was hundreds of kilometers away. The grieving husband returning in tears, the only remaining heir, fighting in court to get his hands on her father's trust. But what proof do we have besides our words? Asked Elena. For the moment, only that. But it won't stay that way, said Rodica, looking at Darius. Earlier you said something important, Darius, the lawyer asked him gently. That Dad told his men to ensure something after the fire starts. Do you remember exactly? The boy nodded, hugged his knees to his chest, and stared into the void, searching his memory. He said, "The plan goes ahead. After they fall asleep, you go, start the fire, and make sure to take what's in the metal safe after the fire starts. It's my insurance." I didn't understand then, but he was scared. Rodica pursed her lips. The safe? The fireproof safe in the office, which your father installed? No, Colleen, I know exactly what type it is. It withstands violent fires and even explosions. Whatever is inside is most likely intact. Colleen probably thought the inheritance papers or even the real will were in the safe. That's why he wanted them out quickly. But your father wouldn't have been that naive. He wouldn't have put them there, said Elena slowly. He knew Colleen knew the combination. He told him back when he still trusted him. Exactly, agreed Rodica. So we have to ask ourselves what was actually in the safe, why it was so important to Colleen that he sent men into the middle of a fire to recover it. Darius suddenly looked up. It's not Grandpa's papers, he said softly. It's Dad's papers. His notebook is in the safe. What notebook? Asked Elena, amazed. Darius bit his lip. One night I woke up to get water, and I heard Dad yelling in the office on the phone. He was saying, "Don't threaten me. All my notes are here. If I go down, you go down too." Then, after the call, he opened the safe and took out a black notebook. He wrote in it. He seemed very scared. After he finished, he locked it back up. A journal? Colleen's journal? On paper? He who kept his whole life on a phone? And this morning at the airport? Asked Rodica. Darius nodded again. He said on the phone, "The plan stands. Burn everything, but don't forget, the black journal in the safe. It's my insurance. Without it, I won't pay you the rest." A heavy silence fell in the room. Both Elena and the lawyer understood the same thing at the same time. Insurance, repeated Rodica slowly. He didn't want to destroy the journal. On the contrary, he considered it his safety policy, the evidence with which he could control the loan sharks and his accomplices. He put it in the only place he was sure of, in a fireproof safe. His plan was to recover the journal after the accident, to negotiate his freedom with those he incriminated there. But his men didn't get the chance. The sirens came too fast. They ran. The safe is still there, in the middle of the ruins. Elena and Rodica exchanged a look. The same thought had crossed their minds. "We have to take the journal," said Elena, feeling the fear inside her being replaced by a cold determination. "We have to get there before Colleen returns or sends his men." Rodica nodded. "And we won't arrive alone. We will arrive there as legal representatives of your father, with the police and the firefighters on our side." Early in the morning, over the smoking ruins of the house at number 17, a thick haze of smoke and the smell of chemicals rose. The yellow "Do Not Cross" tape traversed the charred gate. A few firefighters were still extinguishing the last hotspots. The fire investigation team was taking photos, taking samples, noting observations. A black sedan stopped in front of the house. Rodica stepped out, impeccably dressed in a sober suit, with a leather briefcase in hand. She headed straight for the policeman at the entrance. "Good morning, officer. I am Rodica Stoyan, the lawyer for the late Mr. Petre Popescu, the legal owner of this house. I am here on behalf of the heiress, his daughter," she said, showing the documents. The policeman furrowed his brows. "The heiress? You mean Mrs. Elena? We haven't managed to find her yet. We fear—" "I understand," Rodica interrupted him in a polite but firm tone. "That is precisely why I must enter now. There are documents and personal belongings in a fireproof safe in the office. Given the situation, I must secure them immediately." At that moment, a taxi stopped abruptly, screeching its brakes. Colleen jumped out, disheveled, with deep circles under his eyes, his clothes wrinkled. He rushed toward the gate, screaming, "Elena! Darius! Where are you? Why can't you find anyone?" The policeman caught him. "Mr. Ionescu, please calm down. We are sorry for your loss. The fire was very strong. We haven't found—" The words "anybody" froze on his lips. "They found nothing," flashed through Colleen's mind. In his calculations, Elena and Darius should have been in their beds, easy to identify among the rubble. The idea that they might have escaped crossed his mind like lightning, but he banished it immediately. He had to play the role to the end. He collapsed to his knees, hitting the asphalt with his fists. "No, no, they must be inside," he shouted with perfectly acted despair. "My wife and child are there." While the scene unfolded, Rodica signaled discreetly to two men who had accompanied her, a safe specialist and an assistant. Ignoring Colleen's theater, she headed straight toward the ruins of the office. "Miss Stoyan, the office was here," said a firefighter. "The metal is still hot." "Then let's move fast," she replied, letting the specialist start work on the safe blackened by smoke, sitting in a corner of the collapsed room. "What are you doing there?" shouted Colleen, standing up abruptly. He stopped crying instantly. "That safe is mine." "You have no right to touch my things." Rodica turned to him with a cold expression. "Mr. Ionescu, I am sincerely sorry for your loss," she said in a neutral tone. "But this safe was installed by Elena's father and is listed in the documents as belonging to the trust I represent. I have a legal obligation to secure the contents." Colleen understood that he couldn't protest too much without appearing suspicious. If he threw himself at the safe, if he insisted it was his, the image of the grieving husband would have cracked, so he stood still, clenching his fists, his gaze glued to the safe. The specialist worked quickly. The metal, though blackened and heated, had kept its structure. With a few precise maneuvers, the bolt gave way. The massive door opened with a hiss. Rodica stepped forward with special gloves on her hands. Warm steam escaped from inside. She carefully took out a bent metal box. She opened it. Inside, slightly damp but intact, was a notebook with a black leather cover. The journal. The lawyer picked it up, looked at it for a moment, then put it in her briefcase, locking it. Only then did she turn and look Colleen straight in the eye. For a few seconds, their gazes met. In his eyes, panic. In hers, the certainty that the match had turned. Without saying anything, the message was clear. Your game is over. Back in her studio apartment, the dim light of the desk lamp fell on the open black journal. Elena sat in front of it with Darius asleep on the sofa.
Rodica had been reading for nearly 1 hour. Her face remained calm, but her clenched jaw betrayed her fury. Finally, she closed the notebook slowly. The sound rang in the room like a cell door slamming shut. "It is worse than I thought," she said. Kalin noted everything: dates, names, sums, the names of the loan sharks, the names of the 2 arsonists, the advances paid, the travel plan as an alibi, even the draft of the message he sent you last night. "Did he write about me too?" asked Elena in a barely whispered voice. "Yes," answered Rodica, pushing the journal away as if it burned. "He calls you naive and easy to manipulate. He says he can't wait to finish everything and start a new life with your father's money. He already has plans for vacations abroad after the mourning period." Every word hit Elena like a punch. Naive, easy to fool. She had loved him with her whole being, and he had scheduled her death between 2 work meetings. Tears filled her eyes, but this time they were hot with rage, not grief. "We have the proof and the option to go to the police." "We can," said Rodica, "and this journal is very strong evidence. But Kalin is slippery. He will hire the best lawyers. He will claim the journal is a fake or that it was written under pressure. He will drag out the trial for years. The loan sharks won't testify. The arsonists are already gone."
"We don't just want him to go to prison, Elena. We want to destroy him completely, to force him to admit his deeds without escape." Elena looked up. "How?" Rodica clasped her hands together. "Through what your father created as a protection system. The inheritance isn't in a single account. The money is scattered in over 10 safety deposit boxes at different banks under false names. To access them legally, we need the real will, which we have, and a complete list of those boxes." "And the list?" asked Elena. "It is in a single safety deposit box that Kalin knows about at Fortuna Bank in the old center, under your real name," said the lawyer. "Your father relied on the fact that you would remember the story about the childhood memory box."
"He also knew that Kalin was listening to you." Rodica sketched a bitter smile. "Except your father did something else. That box doesn't open with a single key, but with 2 identical ones. He gave one to you, and you wore it for years around your neck under your scarf. The other he gave to me. Kalin knows nothing about the second copy, but my key melted in the fire." "So," whispered Elena, "for him your key is lost." "Yes," answered Rodica. "In his mind your key is lost. What we are going to do is put in front of him exactly the thing he is waiting for, a miraculously found key." The plan was simple and brilliant. At the same time, Rodica had an informant, Doru, a petty employee at an investment firm Kalin had worked with. He also had gambling debts and was looking for a way out. "Doru will call Kalin in 2 days," Rodica explained to Elena. "He will tell him that a few days ago you came to him scared. You told him you were being followed and that you had to disappear, that you left him the only valuable thing you could save from the house, a small chain with a little key. Doru doesn't know what it is, but he needs cash and is willing to sell it to Kalin." When Kalin actually received the phone call, he was caught in his own web. He knew that Elena and Darius were alive because no one had found bodies, and the police had declared them missing. He knew the journal was no longer in the safe and was convinced it had reached Rodica. He was terrorized by the idea that it could be used against him. Doru, the rat, appeared as a last chance. They met in a crowded mall parking lot. Kalin handed him the last cash he had, in exchange for a small, worn key, identical to the one Elena had worn for years around her neck. He clenched the key in his palm greedily. He felt in control again. That night, in a hotel room paid for with his last credit, he wrote feverishly, together with a forger, a death certificate for Elena and Darius, and a fake power of attorney signed by Elena, giving him access to the safety deposit box.
The next day, at 10 o'clock, he had an appointment at Fortuna Bank. He swallowed the bait, Rodica told Elena with a glint of satisfaction. Tomorrow at 10 o'clock, he comes with the fake documents and your key and will try to get his hands on your father's inheritance, but in fact, he will fall alone into the trap. In the bank's safety deposit box room, the cold air smelled of metal and old concrete. It was an almost clinical silence. Only the clock on the wall and the breathing of those present could be heard. Elena sat on a wooden chair in a small booth, with a metal table between her and the door. Darius, serious, was squeezing her hand.
In the corner, Rodica stood motionless, and next to her, two plainclothes police officers looked like just some bored clerks. The heavy locks of the safes lined the walls like metal eyes. They had arrived 1 hour earlier, entering through a side door intended for staff. The bank manager, Mr. Darius, an old friend of Elena's father, had led them directly to the area with calm complicity. At 10 o'clock sharp, footsteps on the marble corridor approached. Elena immediately recognized the rhythm of Colleen's walk. "He is here," she told herself, feeling her heart plummet into her stomach. Beyond the partition wall, she heard his voice. "It is a terrible tragedy, Mr. Ionescu," the bank manager was saying with fake compassion. "I am unspeakably sorry for your loss." "Thank you, Mr. Darius," answered Colleen with his husky voice, full of pain. "I just want to resolve what was left behind by Elena as quickly as possible. It is too hard for me." The rustle of papers was heard. "Here you have the death certificate and the power of attorney she signed before everything happened," he explained. "All right, everything seems in order," said the director. "Let's go to the box." Their steps approached. They passed right by the booth where Elena was waiting, Darius squeezing her fingers to the point of pain. They stopped in front of a metal door. "This is the bank's key," said Darius, inserting a first piece of metal into the lock. "Now please use the key you have." The metallic clink was heard. The box opened. Elena imagined Colin holding his breath, convinced that inside were certificates, money, and escape route. "According to procedure," the director continued, "Mrs. Elena Popescu requested that any access to this box be supervised by a guardian appointed by her father. It is a simple formality, but the respective person is waiting for you in the verification booth. Please enter." The door to Elena's booth was knocked on gently. One of the policemen opened it from the inside. Colin stepped in, adjusting to the dim light. He expected a bored lawyer or some distant uncle. Instead, in front of him, at the table, sat Elena, alive, wearing a light blue scarf, the same one he had given her once. She was breathing. She looked at him without a trace of love, only with a sharp coldness. Next to her, Darius, the boy he had tried to burn in his own bedroom. Colleen's face collapsed. It wasn't just surprise, it was pure horror, as if he had seen a ghost. All the blood vanished from his cheeks. He took a step back, his hand going almost automatically to his chest, to protect his heart from the specter he was seeing. The silence was so dense it could be cut with a knife. Then Darius's clear voice was heard. "Were you looking for us, Dad?" Colleen flinched. His gaze shifted from his son to Elena. She raised a hand in turn. In it was not the key, but the black journal. "Or were you looking for this?" she whispered. In that same instant, Colin understood. He had been lured into a trap. He instinctively tried to turn toward the door, to run, to get out of that small booth, but he didn't get to take a step. The two plainclothes police officers, almost invisible until then, grabbed his arms with iron strength. The bank manager appeared in the doorway with a completely changed expression, cold and professional. "Mr. Ionescu," said Rodica, stepping out of the shadows, "the game is over." Colin did not fight back anymore. His legs turned to jelly. He was left only with his gaze moving from Elena to the black journal, understanding that all the pieces had turned against him. In the police interrogation room, the white, bare walls and the heavy metal table created an atmosphere of cold and sterility. Colleen sat on the chair, already dressed in the orange jumpsuit of pretrial detention. His face was pale, but his eyes shone with fury. The silence of nearly 1 hour in the cell had given him time to rebuild his script. He was no longer playing the role of the grieving husband. Now he was putting on the mask of a victim of a conspiracy. The door opened.
Commissioner Barson entered with his tough face, followed by the bank manager and Rodica. "This is a setup," screamed Callan immediately, pointing at the lawyer. "This woman has wanted my father-in-law's inheritance for years. She brainwashed Elena. My wife has always been unstable. She surely planned everything to destroy me. I knew nothing about the fire. I was in another city. Hundreds of witnesses saw me at the airport." Commissioner Barson pulled up a chair and sat calmly in front of him. "Let's end the theater, Mr. Ionescu," he said, opening a file. "Let's start with the simplest thing." He took out the first paper. "Here we have the power of attorney signed by Elena, empowering you to access the safety deposit box. Graphology experts have already confirmed that the signature is forged. Then the fake death certificate issued by a network of criminals from the port. The respective persons have been detained and have declared clearly that you paid for the documents." Colin clenched his jaw. "I was desperate. I thought they died. I wasn't thinking clearly." "Of course," said Barson, "just as unclearly as you were thinking when you met Doru, our informant, in the mall parking lot, to buy a key that he told you Elena had left him. Were you desperate then, too?" "Elena asked me to send her money," shouted Colin. "She ran away with my child. She sold me the key to pay for her escape."
"It is clear that she framed me with this woman." Rodica finally looked up. "Alibis are wonderful things, Mr. Ionescu," she said calmly. "But alibis only help when no one knows what you did before you appeared at the airport." Colleen looked at her with hatred. "Shut up, old hag." The commissioner ignored him. He put the black journal on the table. "This book," Rodica continued, "is very detailed. Names, dates, payments, plans. But even without it, you still would have buried yourself." "It is fake," spat Colleen. "You put it in the safe to frame me. I didn't write such a thing." Barsan smiled coldly. "The journal is just the cherry on top. We don't even need it to convict you," he said. "We have something else."
"Something that isn't ours, but your son's." Colleen froze. "Darius? What does Darius have to do with this?" The commissioner signaled. A policeman brought a laptop and a mini projector. "A few weeks before the fire," explained Burson, "Darius bought a toy, a small robot camera, a spy toy, as curious boys like. Without you realizing, he put the toy on a shelf in your office, with the lens pointed at the desk. He just wanted to understand why his father was so angry." The commissioner pressed play. On the white wall, a shaky image appeared, with modest resolution, but clear enough. Colleen's office could be seen, dimly lit. The date and time were in the corner of the screen, 2 days before the fire. Colleen sat at the desk with the phone to his ear. The sound was clear. "The plan goes ahead," his voice was heard clearly in the interrogation room. "I will be at the airport when it all happens. The alibi is solid. Listen to me well. Light the fire in Darius's bedroom and the master bedroom. It has to look like an accident. But after you start the fire, go into the safe. The black book inside is my insurance. Without it, you don't see any money." Colleen had stopped breathing. The film continued. Another recording from the day before the fire. Now he was talking to 2 men whose faces could not be seen, but whose voices were recorded perfectly. "I don't care how," Colleen was saying in the footage. "Pills, gas, whatever you want. The important thing is that they sleep deeply. I don't want screams. I don't want them to manage to run. When everything is ready and the house is burning, I become the sole heir. The money is unlocked in a few weeks, and we all get our share." When the projection stopped, nothing could be heard in the room except the laptop fan. Any discussion about a setup or an unstable Elena had evaporated. There were his images, his voice, the date, the time, the plan, everything before the fire. Colin hung his head. His shoulders shook, but not from real crying, but from the complete collapse of all masks. "They pushed me to this," he whispered, barely audible. "The loan sharks threatened to hurt Darius and Elena. I had no choice."
"I did it to protect them." "No," answered Radhika with a voice devoid of any mercy. "You did it to save your own skin. You sold your wife and child for money." Colleen began to repeat mechanically, "I had no choice. I had no choice." But the words interested no one anymore. The confession was complete. The film spoke for itself, and the journal was just the bonus that tied all the threads together. In the adjacent observation room, Elena watched the scene from behind the one-way mirror with Darius held to her chest. She had covered his ears with her palms so he wouldn't hear his father's words. She, however, heard everything, every sentence, every pathetic excuse.
She looked at the man with whom she had shared a bed for 9 years as he collapsed in front of her, revealing his true face. She felt no love anymore. She didn't even feel hatred, just a cold, strange silence and a heavy relief. It was all over. The chain that had bound her to Colleen had broken permanently. Colleen's trial quickly became news throughout the country. A respected businessman, a model husband and devoted father in appearance, who in reality had planned the death of his wife and child in cold blood for money. The story fascinated and horrified alike. The press howled, but Elena and Darius never appeared in the courtroom. Radhika represented them in court, protecting them from the media circus. The evidence was crushing.
The journal, the fake documents, the bank manager's testimony, Doru's statements, and especially the footage from the camera toy. Colin's lawyers tried to contest the legality of the recordings, to insinuate that the journal had been fabricated, that Colin had been forced by financial pressure, and that he was, in a way, a victim too. But all arguments were shattered in the face of the evidence. On the day of the sentencing, Colin, visibly aged, with graying hair at the temples, listened as the judge listed the charges: conspiracy to commit murder, attempted double homicide, premeditated arson, forgery, and use of forgery. The judge called his deeds one of the most heinous betrayals of family ties. The verdict: guilty on all counts, sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. But the punishment didn't end at the penitentiary door. The journal had mysteriously reached the hands of the authorities, tracking the networks of loan sharks and paid arsonists. Their names, written carefully by Colin, had transformed his insurance book into a condemnation ticket. In their world, betrayal was the greatest sin. In prison, Colin was nobody. He no longer had money to buy protection. He was known as the man who sold out his accomplices. His life, as Radhika had predicted, became a slow nightmare day after day. A few weeks after the sentencing, Elena and Radhika returned to Fortuna Bank, this time with a legal court order in hand and the original key from the set the lawyer had kept. In the cold booth, the bank manager placed the safety deposit box on the table. When they opened it, they didn't find gold bars or envelopes of money, just a paper envelope and a small notebook. In the envelope was a letter from her father. Written with the firm hand of Petre Popescu, it explained why he had hidden everything. "I didn't want to burden you with the care of money, my daughter. I wanted you to live your youth for yourself, not for fortune hunters. True wealth is your freedom. This money is just tools. Be careful whose hands it falls into." The notebook contained the complete list: the false names, the banks, the numbers of over 10 safety deposit boxes spread throughout the country. A long period of errands, signatures, and procedures followed. With Radhika's help, Elena legally transformed everything her father had left into clean, transparent funds. The sum was immense, far beyond anything she had ever imagined. A fortune that could support her and Darius, not just for life, but for countless generations.
But that money, knowing what she had gone through for it, made her tremble. It was the same fortune that had almost killed them. Elena made a clear decision.
Everything that was still linked to Colleen's name, the burnt house, the car bought through the company, the joint investments, was sold and the money donated entirely to orphanages. She wanted not a single low sullied by him. She and Darius were to live only from what came cleanly from her father. With Rodica's help, the Popescu Fund was reorganized into a foundation. 1 year later, children's laughter was heard in a yard full of greenery, not in some luxurious villa, but in a modest, bright house on the edge of the city. Elena sat on the porch with a mug of jasmine tea in her hand, wearing a brightly colored scarf. Her features had softened, the tension lines around her eyes had faded.
Darius, now 8 years old, ran through the garden chasing a butterfly with a real smile on his face. He was going to therapy, and the nightmares had become rarer. He spoke more, laughed more often. In the city center, a new building bore a discreet sign, the Popescu Heritage Foundation. With her father's money, Elena and Rodica had set up a double program: scholarships for intelligent and vigilant children from poor families, children like Darius, and legal assistance and shelter services for women and children trapped in abusive or manipulative relationships. The inheritance that had almost killed her had become a shield for others. Darius stopped running and came to the porch. In his small palm shone a white daisy. He held it out to Elena with a wide smile. "For you, Mom," he said proudly. Elena took the flower, feeling her heart warm. "Thank you, my dear." Darius hugged her tightly. "Thank you for believing me back then at the airport," he whispered. "If you hadn't believed me, I would have—" She put a finger to his lips. "I am not the one who should thank you, Darius," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I thank you. You are my hero. You saved us." They both sat on the steps, looking at their garden bathed in the gentle afternoon light. Colleen's shadow had disappeared from their lives. The fire that had destroyed their house had also burned the last ties to the man who had betrayed them. In his place remained peace, safety, and the indestructible bond between a mother and her son, two survivors who had passed through the flames and come out the other side, stronger than ever.